Thank you for joining this discussion on the isolation and ill treatment of political prisoners in Belarus. My name is Jeremy Branston. I'm the Regional Director for Eastern Europe here at RFERL, and I'm pleased to serve as your moderator today. Nearly 1,500 people are considered political prisoners inside Belarus. That includes journalists, human rights defenders, opposition politicians. Belarusian political prisoners face harsher treatment, and several have died in detention recently, including blogger Nikolai Klimovich and artist Aleh Pushkin. The Lukashenko regime systematically exerts psychological pressure on political prisoners by limiting communication with their lawyers and their families, and it is holding an increasing number of prisoners incommunicado. That means that it carries the risk of enforced disappearances, a crime against humanity when practiced in a widespread or systematic manner. Now, we have a distinguished panel joining us today to shed light on this important issue and share their recommendations for policy makers. I'd like to introduce our colleague, Aleh Hruzdzilovich. He is a journalist for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, the Belarus service, which is known as Radio Svoboda. He was unjustly imprisoned in Belarus from December 2021 to September 2022. We also have with us today Anastasiia Kruope, who is an assistant researcher at the Europe and Central Asia Division of Human Rights Watch, and Pavel Sapelko. He's a Belarusian human rights defender and lawyer at the Viasna Human Rights Center. If you have any questions for our panelists, we encourage you to submit them using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So let's begin the discussion. Anastasiia, I'd like to start with a question for you. Could you give an overview of the human rights crisis that we're seeing inside Belarus today? How did we get here? And how do you see the issue of political imprisonment within the context of broader human rights trends inside Belarus?
Thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you to Radio Free Europe for organizing this discussion, which is incredibly important. So, unfortunately, the phenomenon of politically motivated persecution is not new to Belarus. We've seen the crackdown on peaceful protesters in 2010. We've seen the crackdown on civil society. But the scale and the gravity and the systematic and the widespread nature of the human rights abuses that followed the 2020 peaceful protests is unprecedented, at least in the history of modern Belarus. And as you might know, in the second report, the examination, the UN Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights and their examination of Belarus came to a conclusion that these grave human rights abuses may amount, at least some of them may amount to crimes against humanity. So this shows the wide-scale nature and the gravity. Once the protests following the presidential elections in 2020 and the contested victory of Alyaksandr Lukashenka that he declared, once the protests largely were suppressed, the authorities started targeting civil society. They started targeting the human rights defenders, independent journalists, en masse. And this is not to say that they stopped targeting the protesters or those who were perceived by authorities as those who disagree with the official agenda. But in any case, the authorities were trying to create the atmosphere of fear, the retaliation against the human rights defenders and independent journalists for their work, but also by prosecuting them, they were trying to sort of create this informational vacuum around the human rights abuses that were very much ongoing. So we saw the closed trials. We saw that lawyers had to sign the non-disclosure agreements, meaning they couldn't tell anything pretty much about the cases of their clients. We saw the restriction of correspondence imposed on detainees. We saw the persecution of family members for advocating for their loved ones who were unfairly prosecuted. Here, of course, I have in mind Daria Losik, who was advocating for her husband, Ihor Losik, who is now serving a lengthy prison sentence on politically motivated grounds. And we also saw that the sources of human rights groups like Viasna and the sources of independent media were labeled as extremist, so that the information, that the light that they shed on this ongoing persecution and repressions would be undermined in one way or another. And this is a way to segue to the main topic of our discussion today, the incommunicado detention, because the way the political prisoners are treated behind bars in Belarus is also a part of this campaign of silencing them, of bullying their families, their lawyers into silence, because they are subjected to the harsh conditions in reprisal, in retaliation for people outside of prison speaking out on their behalf and trying to advocate for them. So we see as a practical result of it, as a direct result of this tactics, that people don't want to flag their cases as politically motivated. They come out of prison and then report their prosecution as a politically motivated one. Families are also sort of trying to be careful and not to flag their loved ones' cases as politically motivated, because this could cause the retaliation. So my message for now, before we switch to the discussion, is that the repressions are very much ongoing, despite the fact that the Belarusian authorities are trying to silence everyone down. They try to sort of create informational vacuum and hush up the repressions. They are very much ongoing, and it's important to keep that in mind.
Thank you for that. Aleh, you recently released a book about the 9 months that you spent behind bars inside Belarus. Can you share some of your experiences as a political prisoner? Did you witness, or did you personally experience instances of isolation, of ill treatment by the prison authorities?
Yes, I forgot to switch the microphone. Sorry. This is my book. It's called "Моє тюремне мури." It's mean my prison walls. My experience consists from 9 months in the different prisons. This is 4 months in the colony number 15 near Mogilov, and 5 months before in the different Minsk and Mogilov, как он называется, protected investigation center. And before, I spent 25 days during protests in 2020 in Okrestina, a very famous prison, and in Baranovich. And in all these prisons, I saw the things that show me that government rules of Belarus considered the protesters, members of protest of 2020 as the enemies. All the conditions in these prisons were awful. For example, in Okrestina, you haven't opportunity to sleep normally. You haven't bags. You need to sleep on the floor. You haven't parcels, any communications with your relatives, even with lawyers. You have very bad food because parcels are banished, and so on and so on. I have to stress that this practice continues even now after 3 years of protests in Belarus, because now people are arrested and shown and taken to the Okrestina, to the different in other centers, in the regions of Belarus, and then begins for them this line which I had to go through in 2022. Total slow investigation, a very awful court, tried, then very bad transportation from one prison to another, to the colony, and of course punishment by solitary confinement. It's called in Belarus shiza, penalty isolation jail, where condition is very bad. Now maybe I go to Belarusian language. It will be easy for me.
So I would like to continue. All of those prosecutions of political prisoners continue literally from the first steps of these persons when they enter Belarusian prisons. From the very first days, people are recorded as extremists, which means the authorities pay more attention to them and they punish them more. So they carry the stigma of political extremist, and people, when in detention, can feel it from the very first moment. Previously, that would mean more scrutiny, but today, this means that this person will definitely get into a punishment cell, and this is solitary confinement. When I was in a colony, correctional colony, for the first day, I was warned that I would definitely get into the punishment cell. I tried to follow all the rules and routines. Still, 5 days after, I was called to the prison manager, and he gave me 10 days of punishment cell just because there was some mistake, as they said, in the list of the items that belonged to me and that I had in my cell. And then when I was in a punishment cell, starting from that moment, by the way, I started describing my life in prison. You can start reading it, and this is actually on the first page. I recall a person who is standing in front of me in a line of those who have an appointment at the prison manager, and I could hear some cries there inside, and I could see the person who actually wetted his pants after visiting the prison manager. So that is the environment of fear. People are so much afraid of the prison, of the punishment cell, that it comes to that. Then I was placed to a punishment cell, but when I was taken there, I was severely beaten on the way to the punishment cell, and they also threatened me with various punishments. They said we would take you to the special treatment cell for actually torturing me, and they used actually cold in order to punish me. You do not have any bed. You just stay on some wooden floor. You cannot actually sit during the day. You are forced to walk around the cell throughout the whole day. If you sit down on the floor or if you try to lay down, then they will report a violation, and then this will mean that you will get into a punishment cell for another term. That's why I got another 10 days at a punishment cell, because I was punished for allegedly not cleaning my toilet. They said there's a smell. However, there was no smell. I actually had to visit a toilet every hour because my body could not stand this cold day and night. Nobody paid attention to that. So I actually was taken to the punishment cell again. So I spent 20 days in a punishment cell. So actually, all political prisoners get the same term in a punishment cell. So that's what they get from the very beginning. And then when you are in a correctional colony, all political prisoners face very bad ill treatment and scrutiny, and many of those, especially those who are famous people who are who are known to the public, they are taken to special cells in prison, and this is a section of a punishment cell. Some of them are taken there for half a year, and after that you can get into a closed prison according to Article 1411, and this regularly happens in Belarus. Also, I would mention a few things about healthcare. Since there is no good healthcare in prisons, this is described in my book. You can open page 223, and I describe a situation when I was taken to a punishment cell. And according to the law, the person should be checked by a health worker whether the person can stand being in a punishment cell. Allegedly, they had to do it, and they had to make some medical tests, they said, and then the officer comes to me and I'm saying, the doctor said I have to take medical tests. And the officer says, it's not relevant anymore. He grabs my hand and he brings me to the punishment cell. So at the headquarters, they have already decided that I have to be in a punishment cell for punishment. So they didn't care about any health or tests. This happens to everyone. I asked another health worker, how come? And he says, really openly, if they want to, they will bring you to the punishment cell. They don't care about your health record. Nobody is going to check your health. So I suspect, I guess, that the same thing happened with Witold Ashuruk, a political prisoner who was in the Shklov correctional colony. Against his health record, he was taken to a punishment cell where he died. It was back in 2021, 2 years after that. This summer, the same situation happened with the famous Belarusian artist Aleh Pushkin. He was taken there. He was taken from the Vatsevich correctional colony to a prison in Grodno city, and after a long transit, he accidentally died. And I believe that he died under the same circumstances, when they simply neglected his medical status, his health status. He was actually processed by this machine, by this harsh machine. And that's why we can see multiple deaths like that in Belarus. And this is relevant not only to political prisoners. I had a bad neighbor who we shared a bed together. He had a tumor in his brain, and he was losing consciousness when we marched in prison. And he said he would get to see a doctor. He would go for medical tests just in half a year. He was not sure to survive till then. Another person told me, see, in our colony, we have a few people who have died from cancer, tumors. Quite often, people who are in prisons develop cancer just because of the stress, and people die there because of lacking healthcare.
Thank you, Aleh, for sharing your very powerful personal story. I think it's important to stress that we're not reading Solzhenitsyn here. We're not talking about the Soviet Union. We are talking about what is going on today in the heart of Europe, in a European country. Pavel, let me ask you, Viasna is the leading organization that's keeping track of the ever-growing register of political prisoners inside Belarus. 5 of your colleagues remain behind bars there, including the founder of Viasna and the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Aleh Bialiatski. So, as a lawyer, can you describe for us the legal and judicial tools that the Lukashenko regime is using to perpetuate political imprisonment. I mean, how does the government justify the unlawful practice of incommunicado detention and other forms of ill treatment that we just heard about?
I could tell that Lukashenko regime uses all the shortcomings of the Belarusian law to put pressure on political prisoners and their families. Belarusian human rights defenders criticized these shortcomings long ago, before 2020, and called to eliminate them and change the law. I will list the main problems: weak legislature, weak judiciary, weak bar, I mean legal profession. The prosecutor's office became a supporter of repression and a tool of repression. Lack of an ombudsman, a lack of public oversights in prison, subordination of prisons to the Ministry of Internal Affairs. That's why thousands of cases were initiated against Lukashenko's opponents and dissidents. As you said, 1,500 political prisoners exist in the country, and another 1,300 political prisoners were released because they served their sentence or were given non-custodial sentences. The next problem is what allows for unpunished arbitrariness in prison. It's the absolute power of the prison authorities over the prisoner, as Aleh said. The possibility to arbitrarily punish prisoners and worsen their conditions of detention. Other reasons are a law that sets limits on the number of visits and allows the authorities to deprive a convict of visits and phone calls to family members. Another law established a rule that only a convicted person can initiate a meeting with a lawyer after the sentence has entered into legal force. That's my short answer to this very complete question.
I apologize, a technical issue. I was unable to unmute, but thank you for that. I'm going to go back to you now, Anastasiia, to look ahead a little bit. In your opinion, what can the international community do to end arbitrary and incommunicado detention in Belarus? Are there any international mechanisms that can hold the perpetrators of these crimes accountable? What, if any, leverage do Western governments still have over the Lukashenko regime?
Thank you, Jeremy. This is a very complicated question, as you can imagine. With regards to coming back to the lack of information, etc., I think it's crucially important that the international community continues to pay attention to the issue of politically motivated persecution, and just be aware of why there could be less information, but the repressions are in fact still ongoing. And as a part of this effort, it's very important to continue support Belarusian human rights defenders and Belarusian independent journalists who are the ones shedding the light and continuing shedding the light on these repressions, who have the understanding of the situation, the connections that are needed to document the ongoing repressions. And I do not only mean the institutional support, but also continuous support with visas, with residence permits, in a sort of sustainable long-term fashion for people to have the visibility and to be able to continue their work. Also, there could be some preventative steps if we talk about the arbitrary detention, right? It's not only the continuous humanitarian visas for those people who have to go into exile, but also trying to come up with the solutions for the arising issues such as the passports. As you might have heard, since September, Belarusians cannot obtain passports abroad. They have to go back to the country, which exposes them to the risk of arbitrary detention again. So the host countries should try and come up with a solution of alternative identification documents that would prevent people from going back, in many cases when they don't know that they might be facing persecution. But sort of, as the question implies, I guess it's impossible to stop the practice of incommunicado detention without talking about the overall accountability of the authorities for the grave human rights violations they have been committing. And talking about the leverage and the mechanisms available. I know it might sound frustrating, but the most powerful tool we have is the accountability. And this is not an instant solution. Sometimes it takes many, many years for the perpetrators to be brought to justice. But this is why it's, there is a reason why the authorities are trying to kind of maintain the information, why they try to create the informational vacuum, why they try to anonymize people who are committing human rights abuses. They really are concerned about the accountability, the attribution of this accountability. So right now, it makes sense to focus on preserving the evidence of human rights abuses. And as Pavel can tell you, there is a great initiative called the Accountability Platform, where human rights organizations, including Belarusian ones, came together to document and preserve the evidence and to attribute the responsibility to the perpetrators. And in addition to that, we have the examination that I already mentioned, examination on Belarus, that is also collecting within their mandate the evidence of the grave human rights abuses. So we should make sure to enhance this mechanism, to turn it into the investigative mechanism that can continue their work, boost their mandate so that they do not only focus on the events of 2020, but also can talk about the human rights abuses that were committed more recently, right? To be more relevant, to be more efficient, to react to the new challenges that the authorities are posing. And preserve what we have, which is the UN Special Rapporteur on Belarus and the unique mechanism and tools that they have. And finally, one of the most efficient tools at our disposal is the universal jurisdiction, meaning the ability of the states that are hosting the survivors of human rights abuses to prosecute based just merely on the fact that the survivor is now in their jurisdiction. So it is important to allocate resources to these universal jurisdiction cases for the states that are hosting the survivors to look into the cases, open more of them, and to move forward the ones that had already been opened. And this is all a long-term goal and a long marathon, but it is a marathon towards justice because the accountability really matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Turning back to you, Pavel, are there any domestic legal avenues inside Belarus for victims of political imprisonment to find recourse, for their families to fight back against the incommunicado detention of their loved ones? How should we on the outside approach advocating for individual prisoners? Is it beneficial? Does it harm them?
Yes, the authorities have been successful in isolation political prisoners because there are no effective means and tools to resist the pressure. We are talking about a few well-known people who have been held incommunicado for months. I mean, Babarika, Kolesnikova, Statkevich. But there are hundreds of cases where this situation continues for a few weeks or a few months, then is interrupted by one letter or phone call and then starts again. The relatives of the prisoners do not spread the word about the problem in order to receive that short call or a few lines in a letter. We have encountered another problem. Prisoners are treated with punishment cell ill treatment if their relatives report news about them. And even for having a lot of information about them in the media. There are no legal tool to overcome this situation in Belarus, unfortunately. It can be changed only by external pressure from democratic countries and democratic societies. It can be changed if international organizations and democratic countries organize criminal prosecution of those who are guilty in crimes against humanity. And it's crimes against humanity that are happening in Belarus now.
So, but are advocacy campaigns coming from the outside on behalf of particular prisoners something that that should continue, that you recommend, or something that you feel harms their case?
I think that advocate campaigns has to go on.
Okay. Let me turn back to Aleh now. Two of your RFERL colleagues from the service, two of our colleagues are currently imprisoned in Belarus. That's Ihar Losik, as was mentioned, and also Andrei Kuznechik. So Ihar Losik has been held incommunicado and has not been allowed contact with his family since February. What is your message to your colleagues who remained imprisoned in Belarus, as well as all other political prisoners?
Thank you, but I would also add on top that we have the wife of Igor Losik, Daria. She was imprisoned for fighting for her husband to be released from prison. So what message could be sent to these people? You know, it's hard for me to say anything like that because my experience is much less than that. You remember that I spent 20 days in a punishment cell, and we have not heard anything about Igor Losik for 8 months in a row since February this year. So he must be in a very poor condition and in a very bad environment. I was helped to survive in this environment when I thought, what if they send me to the punishment cell once again, then I can get crazy. So I was helped by the assuredness that then in the free world there are people who do not forget me, who fight for me, that there are people fighting for my freedom. There was an incredible case. Through the doors in the punishment cell, I could hear two people, two officers, two prison officers who could see my name on the door. They said, you see, this is that very journalist from Radio Liberty, and his name is mentioned by many. And then I could see that there was, after they found out that my name was mentioned by many journalists, my situation did not get worse. So I believe that the relatives are threatened by the authorities, but they threaten them to shut them up. But if prison authorities know that there is some oversight, at least civil society oversight, if there is some echo in the society, then they are more careful. So this is my personal experience. Therefore, I would advise that people be careful, but they should not forget that our support is not just a moral support, but this is a real support. And we speak about complaints, visits to prison managers, these letters. For example, my wife wanted to have an appointment with the prison manager, and she got the appointment and she talked to him. She could not hear anything from me for 20 days because I was in a punishment cell. Maybe this helped. Yes, prison officers had many more reasons to put me in a punishment cell again, but I was released from the punishment cell in a correctional colony. So probably I was helped by her visit to the prison manager. So if there are people moving in your favor, this helps. And speaking of those people who are in correctional colonies and those who are in punishment cells, what can I advise them? Exercise, do sports, because this helps you survive. When you have at least 1 square meter of free space in a cell, you can do physical exercises. For example, I was exercising on ventilation bars. So there are bars on a ventilation duct, and I was holding it and I was exercising, and then I felt better emotionally and physically. And those people who will get there, well, probably you have to get rid of bad habits before you get there. I first of all mean those who smoke, because smoking is not what kills you physically, but this what causes lots of problems in the colony itself. You become dependent on money, on other prisoners who can share cigarettes with you, or they sell them to you, or whatever, many other things. So you have to be in a good physical condition in order for you to be able to go through many years in prison, to go through punishment cells, and to get to your family health and safe. And another advice: be more tolerant. Do not worry about some inconveniences in housekeeping matters, in little things. Be more tolerant to your cellmates. There are various people that try to avoid conflicts with them, including conflicts with not only with prison inmates, but with prison officers, and also be responsible to yourself, because your fate is in your hands. And the last thing, if a prisoner gets out of the prison knowing that he or she has been loved, cared, and advocated for, then this makes you happy, and this will help your life.
Thank you very much for your eloquent answer to this question and to my previous question, actually. So with that, I think we're going to transition to the Q&A part. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Denise.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. So our first question is about lawyers and legal representation, and it goes as so. How often are political prisoners denied legal representation in Belarus? What is the status of lawyers representing political prisoners? And how can we support lawyers defending political prisoners and defend them against the regime's attacks?
I think that sounds like a natural question for Pavel, so over to you. The difficulty hearing you.
If you don't mind, I will continue in Belarusian language. This is a very relevant question, which really illustrates what's going on in the judicial system, in the legal system of Belarus. And this is what predetermines the fate of all political prisoners and all those who have faced the judicial system in Belarus. Indeed, in the last 3 years, we have lost more than 300 Belarusian defense lawyers. 100 of them are those who were disbarred. Their licenses were recalled. Today, 6 defense lawyers are behind bars. They are in prisons, so they are prison inmates. Definitely, this affects the status of the legal profession. This definitely affects this affects the way how people are defended in criminal cases and criminal trials, especially if we speak about political cases. Right now, it is very challenging to to find any lawyer willing to take your case, especially we speak about those who are prosecuted as extremists and other criminal code articles. This is also because, according to Belarusian laws, a personal lawyer can be in a trial and in pre-trial investigation. So this is a brief answer to your question.
Okay, thank you. Is there another question, Denise?
Yes. Second question is there a logic behind holding a political prisoner incommunicado? What does the Lukashenko regime gain from doing this? They are already holding the person captive and they can strictly control what they communicate with the outside world.
Well, again, that sounds like a question for Pavel, being the lawyer here.
Okay, I will start answering this question. You know, these atrocity approaches to political prisoners are very difficult to justify or explain by any human nature. It's actually impossible to say why they apply additional pressure means to political prisoners. However, you might guess that the authorities have nothing to take care of. I mean, they see no limits to hurting a political prisoner and his or her family even worse, to make their life even worse than it was prior to that. So their logic is the logic of the people who are dishonest people. I do not remember the proper word in Belarusian.
Okay, next question. Denise, is there another question?
Yes. A broader question this time. How has the war in Ukraine impacted political imprisonment in Belarus and the human rights crisis there in general?
Well, then I'm going to go to Anastasiia with that one.
Thank you, but I think Aleh also wanted to add
And
something.
Aleh, of course, yeah. You want to start, Anastasiia, and then we can switch to Aleh?
I think Aleh wanted to add something on the previous question.
On the
so-
previous question. Okay, go ahead, Aleh, please.
Indeed, I have an add-on. In my view, this ill treatment of prisoners who are prison inmates, this is a very pragmatic step of the Belarusian regime, because that's the way to scare all other people who are not in prisons. So this is not revenge. This is not emotional revenge. No, this is very pragmatic. When I was in prison, we could see that the authorities would grab and arrest and sentence famous people, like famous professors, artists, directors, editors, chief editors, and others. Why? Because they want this to be known. If you detain an ordinary person, who knows the person? Just his or her colleagues, some family members, and that's it. But if you detain a famous person, then this is what helps you to threaten the entire society. So this is a purposeful action. That's why they ensure ill treatment in prisons, in order for the person to be afraid. So people are afraid not to get to prison, not to go into streets, not to like things in social media, not to say a word. So this goes on top of what Pavel has said. I fully agree with him, but I would add this little comment as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, let's go back to the question of how the full-scale invasion of Russia in Ukraine has had an influence on what's going on with the prisoner situation in Belarus. Over to you, Anastasiia.
Thank you. Yes, well, one immediate thing is that Belarusian authorities are also prosecuting those who support Ukraine in this war, those who express any kind of support or who share the location or the movement of Russian troops on the territory of Belarus. As you know, Belarus provides its infrastructure and territory to the Russian troops for the full-scale invasion. So that's one immediate thing. Another thing is obviously with the horrible atrocities happening with regards to, in connection to the war, the full-scale invasion. The international attention, for objective reasons, sort of shifts away from Belarus to the war, and to some extent it might send the wrong message to the authorities that they can now continue doing the things inside the country without the proper attention of the international community, which is, if we continue raising the issue of political prisoners, then it's just going to be sending the obvious signal that that's not the case, and we still are keeping an eye on everything that is happening inside the country. And also, I guess, before the full-scale invasion, there was more hope to directly influence Belarusian authorities. Now there is sort of this feeling that Belarus and Russia are very close tied together, and without influencing the Russian authorities, without a big change happening there, it might be difficult to achieve a big change in Belarus. These are the things that I could think of. I think Pavel had his hand up. Sorry for moderating a bit.
Yeah, go. No, absolutely. Please go ahead.
Yes. I also have a comment about that, and I would like to give you a few figures. A few days ago, we at Viasna estimated the prosecution cases, the number of cases of people who were prosecuted for anti-war protests. And as of today, we can estimate, this is not comprehensive data, but this is what we know. There are 13 people who were sentenced for sabotage, who tried to slow down the movement, railroad movement of Russian military, and these people in total got 200 years of prison in total. 13 people. There were people who shared photos of Russian troops in Belarus, so at least 35 people were sentenced for that. People who expressed their willingness to fight on the side of Ukraine in the war, either in Belarusian or Ukrainian platoons, at least 13 people sentenced for that, for expressing their willingness, and at least 26 people were sentenced for participating in fundraising of Belarusian platoons in Ukraine for protesting against Russian actions in Ukraine. So at least 70 people were sentenced to prison terms of 1 to 23 years.
Okay. We're nearly at the top of the hour. I don't know if we have time for one more question. Denise, what do you think?
Yes, we have one last question for Aleh, and it says, how can we support former political prisoners like yourself who have recently been released by the Belarusian authorities? What kinds of support are helpful for those who remain in Belarus and also for those who leave Belarus?
Speaking of those who left Belarus and need assistance to integrate in the societies where they are now, it depends on the age of the person, on the skills and qualifications of the person. Speaking of myself, yes, I'm an adult. I'm almost of a pension age. One person is supposed to retire, and this person is forced to change his or her entire life. This person requires assistance of multiple institutions, including human rights NGOs and international organizations. I know a couple of journalists, including one of my friends who is in Lithuania, just like me, and he is jobless, and it is really hard for him. There's hardly any chance for him to get any job. Younger people who are more physically capable and who can retrain and re-educate, it is easier for them to get a new employment. And what they need is mental support. They have to be given a chance to get other education skills, a new job. And also, it's important for people to stay close to their friends and family. This helps us when we are in asylum. And those people who were released from prisons and who stay in Belarus, their fate is very doomed, because they can be taken into prisons again. I know one person who stayed in Belarus and who tried to be socially active in his community. I'm not even giving you the name of this community, but this person has started getting additional punishments. He was taken to prison again for several days. So these people will be hunted for by the authorities after they are released from prisons. Authorities continue to scrutinize them. At least earlier, we could see that these people were isolated. They were simply detained by police on the eve of various public holidays. Let's say in Minsk City, when there was a European Championship on ice hockey, at that time, all political activists who had been identified by authorities, the majority of them were detained and taken to the Krestina pre-trial detention center. So I would advise those people to flee from the country, and there are institutions helping Belarusians to flee from Belarus. So that's my advice to those people.
Thank you, Aleh. Well, and on that, I think we're going to conclude our event today. Again, I'd like to thank our distinguished panel, Aleh Hruzdzilovich, Anastasiia Kruope, and Pavel Sapelko. I'd also like to thank all of you who took the time to listen in today and ask questions, as was mentioned in the context of the ongoing war in Ukraine, and now, of course, the events that are happening in the Middle East. It's really important to keep the situation in Belarus uppermost on people's radars so that it doesn't recede into the background. So we thank our guests for reminding us of that, and thank all of you for joining us. And remember that if you want to follow what's going on, RFERL is the place to do it. Thank you.